The Present Miserable State of Ireland, by Jonathan Swift. Sir, by the last packets I had the favour of yours, and am surprised that you should apply to a person so ill qualified as I am, for a full and impartial account of the state of our trade. I have always lived as retired as possible. I have carefully avoided the perplexed honour of city offices. I have never minded anybody's business but my own. Upon all which accounts, and several others, you might easily have found among my fellow citizens persons more capable to resolve the weighty questions you put to me than I can pretend to be. But being entirely at leisure, even at this season of the year, when I used to have scarce time sufficient to perform the necessary offices of life, I will endeavour to comply with your requests, cautioning you not implicitly to rely upon what I say, excepting what belongs to that branch of trade in which I am more immediately concerned. The Irish trade is, at present, in the most deplorable condition that can be imagined. To remedy it, the causes of its languishment must be inquired into. But as those causes, you may assure yourself, will not be removed, you may look upon it as a thing past hopes of recovery. The first and greatest shock our trade received was from an act passed in the reign of King William, in the Parliament of England, prohibiting the exportation of wool manufactured in Ireland. An act, as the event plainly shows, fuller of greediness than good policy, an act as beneficial to France and Spain as it has been destructive to England and Ireland. 103. At the passing of this fatal act, the condition pg 158 of our trade was glorious and flourishing, though no way interfering with the English. We made no broadcloths above 6s per yard, coarse druggets, bays and shalloons, worsted damasks, strong draftworks, slight halfworks and gaudy stuffs were the only product of our looms. These were partly consumed by the meanest of our people, pg 159, and partly sent to the northern nations, from which we had in exchange timber, iron, hemp, flax, pitch, tar, and hard dollars. At the time the current money of Ireland was foreign silver, a man could hardly receive 100 without finding the coin of all the northern powers, and every prince of the empire among it. This money was returned into pg 160 England for fine cloths, silks, and 100. For our own wear, for rents, for coals, for hardware, and all other English manufactures, and in a great measure, supplied the London merchants with foreign silver for exportation. The repeated clamours of the English weavers produced this act, so destructive to themselves and us. They looked with envious eyes upon our prosperity, and complained of being undersold by us in those commodities which they themselves did not deal in. At their instances the act was passed, and we lost our profitable northern trade. Have they got it? No, surely, you have found they have ever since declined in the trade they so happily possessed. You shall find, if I am rightly informed, towns without one loom in them, which subsisted entirely upon the woolen manufactory before the passing of this unhappy bill. And I will try if I can give the true reasons for the decay of their trade, and our calamities. 3 parts in 4 of the inhabitants of that district of the town where I dwell were English manufacturers, whom either misfortunes in trade, little petty debts, contracted through idleness, or the pressures of a numerous family, had driven into our cheap country. These were employed in pg 161 working up our coarse wool, while the finest was sent into England. Several of these had taken the children of the native Irish apprentices to them, who being humbled by the forfeiture of upward of 3 millions by the Revolution, were obliged to stoop to a mechanic industry. Upon the passing of this bill, we were obliged to dismiss thousands of these people from our service. Those who had settled their affairs returned home, and overstocked England with workmen. Those whose debts were unsatisfied went to France, Spain, and the Netherlands, where they met with good encouragement, whereby the natives, having got a firm footing in the trade, being acute fellows, soon became as good workmen as any we have, and supply the foreign manufactories with a constant recruit of artisans, our island lying much more under pasture than any in Europe. The foreigners, notwithstanding all the restrictions the English Parliament has bound us up with, are furnished with the greatest quantity of our choicest wool. I need not tell you, sir, that a custom-house oath is held as little sacred here as in England, or that it is common for masters of vessels to swear themselves bound for one of the English wool ports, and unload in France or Spain. By this means the trade in those parts is, in a great measure, destroyed, and we were obliged to try our hands at finer works, having only our home consumption to depend upon. And I can assure you, we have in several kinds of narrow goods even exceeded the English, and I believe we shall, in a few years more, be able to equal them in broad cloths. But this you may depend upon, that scarce the 10th part of English goods are now imported, of what used to be before the famous act. The only manufactured wares we are allowed to export are linen cloth and linen yarn, which are marketable only in England. The rest of our commodities are wool, restrained to England, and raw hides, skins, tallow, beef, and butter. Now, these are things for which the northern nations have no occasion. We are therefore obliged, instead of carrying woolen goods to their markets, and bringing home money to purchase their commodities. In France, Spain, and Portugal, our wares are more valuable, though it must be owned. Our fraudulent trade in wool is the best branch of our commerce. From hence we get PG 162 wines, brandy, and fruit, very cheap and in great perfection, so that though England has constrained us to be poor, they have given us leave to be merry. From these countries we bring home moidores, pistoles, and louisdors, without which we should scarce have a penny to turn upon. To England we are allowed to send nothing but linen cloth, yarn, raw hides, skins, tallow, and wool. From thence we have coals, for which we always pay ready money, India goods, English woolen and silks, tobacco, hardware, earthenware, salt, and several other commodities. Our exportations to England are very much overbalanced by our importations, so that the course of exchange is generally too high, and people choose rather to make their remittances to England in specie than by a bill, and our nation is perpetually drained of its little running cash. Another cause of the decay of trade, scarcity of money, and swelling of exchange is the unnatural affectation of our gentry to reside in and about London. 104 their rents are remitted to them, and spent there. The countryman wants employment from them, the country shopkeeper wants their custom. For this reason he can't pay his Dublin correspondent readily, nor take off a great quantity of his wares. Their PG 163-4, the Dublin merchant can't employ the artisan, nor keep up his credit in foreign markets. I have discoursed some of these gentlemen, persons esteemed for good sense, and demanded a reason for this their so unaccountable proceeding, expensive to them for the present, ruinous to their country, and destructive to the future value of their estates, and find all their answers summed up under 3 heads: curiosity, pleasure, and loyalty to King George. The 2 first excuses deserve no answer. Let us try the validity of the third. Would not loyalty be much better expressed by gentlemen staying in their respective countries, influencing their dependents by their examples, saving their own wealth, and letting their neighbors profit by their necessary expenses, thereby keeping them from misery and its unavoidable consequence, discontent? Or is it better to flock to London, be lost in a crowd, kiss the king's hand, and take a view of the royal family? The seeing of the royal house may animate their zeal for it, but other advantages I know not. What employment have any of our gentlemen got by their attendance at court, to make up to them their expenses? Why, about 40 of them have been created peers, and a little less than 100 of them baronets and knights. For these excellent advantages, thousands of our gentry have squeezed their tenants, impoverished the trader, and impaired their own fortunes. Another great calamity is the exorbitant raising of the rents of lands. Upon the determination of all leases made before the year 1690, a gentleman thinks he has but indifferently improved his estate if he has only doubled his rentroll. Farms are screwed up to a rack rent, leases granted but for a small term of years, tenants tied down to hard conditions, and discouraged from cultivating the lands they occupy to the best advantage, by the certainty they have of the rent being raised, on the expiration of their lease, proportionably to the improvements they shall make. Thus is honest industry restrained. The farmer is a slave to his landlord. 'Tis well if he can cover his family with a coarse homespun frieze. The artisan has little dealings with him, yet he is obliged to take his provisions from him at an extravagant price, otherwise the farmer cannot pay his rent. The proprietors of lands keep great part of them in their PG 164 own hands for sheep pasture, and there are thousands of poor wretches who think themselves blessed if they can obtain a hut worse than the squire's dog kennel, and an acre of ground for a potato plantation, on condition of being as very slaves as any in America. What can be more deplorable than to behold wretches starving in the midst of plenty? We are apt to charge the Irish with laziness, because we seldom find them employed, but then we don't consider they have nothing to do. Sir William Temple, in his excellent remarks on the United Provinces, inquires why Holland, which has the fewest and worst ports and commodities of any nation in Europe, should abound in trade, and Ireland, which has the most and best of both, should have none. This great man attributes this surprising accident to the natural aversion man has for labor, who will not be persuaded to toil and fatigue himself for the superfluities of life throughout the week, when he may provide himself with all necessary subsistence by the labor of a day or two. But, with due submission to Sir William's profound judgment, the want of trade with us is rather owing to the cruel restraints we lie under than to any disqualification whatsoever in our inhabitants. I have not, sir, for these 30 years past, since I was concerned in trade, the greatest part of which time distresses have been flowing in upon us, ever observed them to swell so suddenly to such a height as they have done within these few months. Our present calamities are not to be represented. You can have no notion of them without beholding them. Numbers of miserable objects crowd our doors, begging us to take their wares at any price, to prevent their families from immediate starving. We cannot part with our money to them, both because we know not when we shall have vent for their goods, and, as there are no debts paid, we are afraid of reducing ourselves to their lamentable circumstances. The dismal time of trade we had during Mar's troubles in Scotland are looked upon as happy days when compared with the present. 105 pg 165. I need not tell you, sir, that this griping want, this dismal poverty, this additional woe, must be put to the accursed stocks, which have desolated our country more effectually than England. Stock jobbing was a kind of traffic we were utterly unacquainted with. We went late to the South Sea market, and bore a great share in the losses of it, without having tasted any of its profits. If many in England have been ruined by stocks, some have been advanced. The English have a free and open trade to repair their losses, but above all, a wise, vigilant, and uncorrupted Parliament and Ministry, strenuously endeavoring to restore public trade to its former happy state. Whilst we, having lost the greatest part of our cash, without any probability of its returning, must despair of retrieving our losses by trade, and have before our eyes the dismal prospect of universal poverty and desolation. I believe, sir, you are by this time heartily tired with this indigested letter, and are firmly persuaded of the truth of what I said in the beginning of it, that you had much better have imposed this task on some of our citizens of greater abilities. But perhaps, sir, such a letter as this may be, for the singularity of it, entertaining to you, who correspond with the politest and most learned men in Europe. But I am satisfied you will excuse its want of exactness and perspicuity, when you consider my education, my being unaccustomed to writings of this nature, and above all, those calamitous objects which constantly surround us, sufficient to disturb the cleanest imagination and the soundest judgment. Whatever cause I have given you, by this letter, to think worse of my sense and judgment, I fancy I have given you a manifest proof that I am, sir, your most obedient humble servant. JSPG 167, PG 166.